I think does it say it's recording now? I think
Yes,
it does.
I received the notifications recording. We are recording. Okay. Um, Welcome everybody. Thank you again for coming and joining with the United Methodist Justice Movement and the United Methodist Africa Forum to go over some of the really exciting developments in Africa regarding the future of the United Methodist Church and how we can continue to be in a fellowship as well and be in connection and from now and into the future. We are looking to do we're looking to do new things and to change how the United Methodist Church is structured. And so hopefully, like Isaiah 43:19 says, this is the start and of a new thing that's going to spring forth. And it's an exciting, it's very exciting. I find it personally very exciting. I hope all of you do as well. And why are we here? The United Methodist Justice Movement has there's some other values, but the three values that bring us here today are our stated values of decolonization, inclusion, and beloved community. Decolonization in this aspect is making a more equitable church structure that better ensures that all regions, geographic regions of the church around the world have equity within our power structures. Inclusion, because WMJM is very committed to the inclusion of all people within the church, and beloved community, because we still we still want to have that connection. United Methodist, we really value the connectionalism of our church and our denomination, and the ability and the ways we can still be in community with each other around the world, and really draw on all of those strengths. And that's why, as we look out further and go into the future, we really support strong regionalization, meaning the different regions have equal power and the ability to do the same things within our structure, and contextualization, meaning that can we adapt the church and our rules to our context, make it so that the different regions are able to fulfill their ministry and work in the context that they are in. And so this is our, I will call on Richard, and this is to give us a snapshot of what the United Methodist Church looks like around the world.
Okay. And Izzy, I'm going to hope that you're going to point your pointer so that you can, as I talk about, oh, thank you. Okay. One of the big changes that's happened in my lifetime is that the United Methodist Church went from being mostly a U.S. church, which is, if you see up on the left, you see the green, they're the 5 jurisdictions. We're in the Western jurisdiction with 300,000 people, and then there are the other jurisdictions. But the United Methodist Church, up until recently, really saw itself as a U.S. denomination, and then it organized something called central conferences to deal with the mission work outside the U.S. And one of the things that the United Methodist Church did was different than many of the other U.S. denominations. We continued the missions were actually part of the United Methodist Church. And so if we go all the way, so there are 7 central conferences. And we're going to go all the way over to the other side where the Philippines, which matches in green. The Philippines is a central conference. Izzy's a member there. It has just over 200,000 United Methodists. So it's a little bit smaller than the Western jurisdiction. And then we can move over to Europe. And if you see Europe, there are 3 colors in Europe. So there are 3 central conferences. The largest one is the Germany Central Conference, which is a bright red, and that has 30,000 United Methodists. And then there's Northern Europe and Eurasia with just under 10,000. And they have an interesting problem in that there's Eastern Europe and there's the Baltic countries, and they have some real divisions within their central conference. And then there's Central and Southern Europe, which is a sort of orangey color, And notice that includes Algeria and Tunis, which is part of Africa. So, and together the three European conferences have just around 100,000 United Methodists. Collectively, they are smaller than the Philippines. Then we get to Africa, and we've got the purplish one, which is over towards the right and not geographically connected, which is Africa Central. It's actually Africa Central Conference. And my impression is that at one point, that was the only central conference in Africa, or one of two central conferences, I'm not sure. That central conference today, or when the statistics were done about 6 years ago, had 600,000 United Methodists. It is double the size of the Western jurisdiction. And then if you come over to the other side of Africa, there is the West Africa Central Conference, which includes Sierra Leone, Nigeria, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, and one or two other, I think there's another, anyway. They have 1,600,000 United Methodists. That makes them larger than the North Central jurisdiction. That makes them larger than the Northeastern jurisdiction. And that actually makes them larger than the South Central jurisdiction, just to do comparison stuff. And then there is the Congo Central Conference, which has 3 million United Methodists. That makes it larger than the Southeastern jurisdiction. So collectively, there are about 7 million United Methodists in the United States. There are about 5 million United Methodists in sub-Saharan Africa. So one of the big changes that's gone on within the denomination is we have become a worldwide choice church with voices from all over the world coming to general conference, and we've got to begin to think about how we live in the world differently. So, and sometimes people ask me, why is there no United Methodist Church in Latin America? That's because at one point there was a United Methodist presence, but those central conferences chose to become autonomous. And there's also other parts of the world where they're Methodist churches, but they're not part of the United Methodist Church. That's a longer discussion beyond what we're going to do today. Anyway, let's move on.
So I've been a general conference delegate a few times now, and when I first started attending general conferences, there were lots of people from Africa and some from Europe and the Philippines, but they didn't seem to have much leadership in the conference. And most, if not all, of the legislation was written by people in the United States. And we spent most of the conference talking about United States matters, some of which didn't affect the central conferences at all, but they had to listen to it and vote on it. There was at least one attempt to revise the structure toward regionalization and a little more equitable structure, and that got voted down because of, several reasons, including not having, it's very difficult to pass anything that has constitutional amendments, which is an important thing. Most of you will remember that in 2019, there was a particularly awful general conference, the special called session in St. Louis, at which the plan of the Commission on the Way Forward was presented, the One Church plan. We had all kinds of great stuff, and what ended up passing was the traditional plan, which was worse than what we had before. But somewhere in that time leading up to that conference, a lot more of us in the United States became really painfully aware of how US-centric our structure really was. And the one thing that most progressives saw was, gee, those people in Africa just don't understand us and they keep voting us down. So obviously that was a terribly oversimplified viewpoint. And some people managed to start some conversations And it's amazing what can happen when people sit down and talk to each other and listen to each other. One of those conversations was around developing a revision of the social principles. And the Board of Church and Society had conversations all over the connection, not just in the United States. And the product, which was supposed to have been voted on in 2020, was the revised social principles, which really are much more globally relevant and appropriate and somewhat more general, leaving room for contextualization. But there were other conversations going on as well. There was more engagement with the central conferences. And one of the things that was happening was Link had a committee on Central Conference organizing and outreach. In the 2016 General Conference that was in Portland, we had a big effort to welcome and include and get acquainted with delegates from General Conference from Africa and the Philippines and Europe. And that continued through this time. And so eventually a group of those people got together and they developed what is known as the Christmas Covenant. And I will let Izzy talk about that.
So we're talking about something that's new happening in the United Methodist Church, and this is something that's new. Well, it started in 2019, as Jan said, and it started really with the conversations that have already been happening way before 2019. Lloyd and I are part of the Christmas Covenant team, and Richard as well on this call. And I've known Lloyd since my organizing days in the Church and Society, General Board Church and Society, but we also met again, and we helped Western Methodist Justice Movement and Link put together that event in terms of inviting who are the people we should invite from central conferences. And that really made a big difference because many of those that are in the Christmas Covenant team right now were part of those conversations. We've had relationships developed over the years. And so when 2019 happened, at the end of that year, by that time, we already saw a lot of the legislation calling for the dissolution of the United Methodist Church or the breaking up of the United Methodist Church. And all of these voices and all of these petitions were coming from the United States. And so we got together and we had conversations and realized that, well, we don't have any voices from our central conferences, and we're a big part of this church, and we need to have a little bit of a say here in what's happening. And so when we realized that our central conference bishops actually supported the creation of a U.S. regional conference, which is a legislation proposed by the Connectional Table, then we said, well, we can probably expand this, and so that it's not just the US becoming one region, but then all of our central conferences becoming regions, and all regions are at, there's parity in what we can do in terms of legislative power, the power to adopt practices, policies within our unique missional contexts. And so that's what happened. We gathered, and at the end of 2019, around Christmas time, that's why it's called the Christmas Covenant, we came out with a piece of legislation that was submitted through the Philippine Central Conference. We looked for which is the first central conference that will convene an AC, and we'll pass it through there and work with the bishops there and work with the delegates there. And so we have this piece of legislation. The website is there, christmascovenant.com. And let me just go through the emphasis points here, that the values are really connectional relationships rooted in mission and respect for contextual ministry settings. And when we got together, the first thing that we did was to talk about values. We didn't talk about what are we going to change to the book of discipline or propose. We talked about what are the values. And then we put together a vision of the church that we all share. These are people from, you will see in the website the names of our participants. all of them, majority of us are from central conferences. And in terms of course, representation in terms of people of color, we're mostly people of color. I can only count probably, well, Richard, and then 2 from Europe. And then the rest of us are people of color. Even the ones from the US are all people of color. And so you can already see the flavor of this piece of legislation is coming from that rootedness in who we are and where we come from in our context. And the fact that people were respectful of each other's views, and I'm an organizer for Reconciling Ministries Network. Everybody knew that, right? Everybody knew I was gay. But there was that respect, and I could say that, you know, this Christmas Covenant team, of which I am the convener, these are my people, and so we can do things together that it's probably not known by other people how we work together. But we do have grassroots outreach because we come from the grassroots. So we're looking at 8 regional conferences, and now this piece of legislation has been supported by all U.S. jurisdictional conferences last year. They passed resolution supporting regionalization as expressed in the Christmas Covenant and in the connectional table, which is right now, the connectional table is harmonizing together with the Standing Committee on Central Conferences, harmonizing these pieces of legislation so that we would have one that would hopefully be presented to General Conference. And again, let me just emphasize that this legislation allows all regions, including the US region, to adapt policies and practices that respond to our missional contexts, meaning we're able to decide in our contexts about ordination standards, who gets to be ordained, and also what are the prohibitions, what are the chargeable offenses. These are all adapted to our regions because we do exist in different missional contexts. So that is a piece of legislation that's new. But then what's also exciting, and I'm going to turn this over to Lloyd, is what is happening in Africa. What's new? Lloyd.
Thank you, Izzy. Thank you very much for that background. And so a lot has been happening from time that like Jen talked about the 2019 and all that has been happening, and the work that has been happening with the Central Conference Outreach Team, the Christmas Covenant. But things were happening in Africa also. Some grassroots people in Africa, we were beginning to ask the questions like, where is our voice as African United Methodists? And we're beginning to see voices that were not identifying what the people in the pew in Africa are worried about. But we were beginning to see voices that were echoing what was happening in the United States rather than what was happening on the pews in the church in Africa. So when I say that, I would like to make reference to organizations like the Africa Initiative led by Jerry Kula and work with the WCA, Global Methodist, and all that stuff. So when that was happening, we started asking the question on how can we do something that identify the African voices, African aspiration, and our understanding of the United Methodist. So a few people came together and began to have conversations. And several times we met, and then we agreed on, let's come up with a forum that would discuss and talk about the church in Africa and chart a future for the church in Africa. Especially that conversation came when the protocol, was announced. The announcement of the protocol and what also was on the ground about dissolution of the United Methodist, plans like the Indiana Plan, gave the motivation to us in Africa to say, we cannot see the United Methodist being dissolved because of how we look at the United Methodist, how it has made Christians being Christians, and justice ministry, the public witness and ministry and mission of the United Methodists across Africa, who just made a lot of us from Africa not accepting the fact that there could be a conversation to dissolve this denomination. So came the protocol talking about division and splitting the church and all that. That also kind of motivated the conversations to say we would need a united Methodist, especially when the Africa Initiative, the WCA, Good News and Confessing Movement, when they begin to give the message that Africa was on board with them to dismantle the United Methodist, we knew that was not true. The people on the pews were not on that page. There were only few individuals who were being paraded and going public and making noise and speaking what they were told to speak and say that was representing Africa. And then we were saying, no, we need to represent what is in the pews in Africa. And what we got from the pews in Africa is Africans are not ready to leave the United Methodist. And Africans are not even aware that there is a conflict in the United Methodist. They don't even understand the conflict and what is it, and asking the question, where is the conflict that you are talking about? So that motivated us to come together. That's why then we came organizing, and then we started what now is known as the United Methodist Africa Forum. I would like to make it clear, if you look at the word forum, it's very deliberate why we called it a forum. The reason why it is a forum is we are saying, let's come together at a forum or in a forum. Let's engage. Let's talk about the future of the church. Let's look at our differences and see what is it that we have in common and how can we move forward. And that's why it is called a forum. So we started the United Methodist Africa Forum, but we needed to make sure that we are in sync with the African leadership, because we had seen that there was no connection between what some who were calling themselves African leaders and the actual African leaders. And in Africa, our understanding of our leaders are our bishops, because we elected them and they are our leaders. So we went to the bishops, the African bishops, all of them. We wrote them letters, all of them active and retired, and told them that we are coming together and started this forum. We would want to hear from you if this is something you would want us to go ahead and have. The response we got was, go ahead. Then we said, we would like to come where you are gathering and present ideas of what we are thinking about. What is it that we are talking about? And then we narrated our vision, our mission, and the goals and what we are trying to do. We couldn't meet with the African bishops when they met at Africa University. Their agenda was full. We tried to organize a webinar. You know, it's not easy pinning bishops down, but we received a letter from the president of all the 3 African Central Conferences. When they gather together as Africa, they have their president. We received a letter from him, the president, which was copied to all the bishops in Africa, active or retired, saying, you go ahead, do what you are doing, recruit more clergy and more laity. That letter came at a very interesting time. When the bishops were gathering in Zimbabwe in September, the Africa Forum began to lobby with the bishop and let them know that besides the Africa Initiative, there is a grassroots movement that is coming up to support the unity of the church. And that is why the African bishops made a statement that we all read, where they say disassociated themselves with the WCA, the Global Methodist, and the Africa Initiative. After that statement, then they say to us, recruit more clergy and laity to join the United Methodist Africa Forum. When they had just said, we will not allow activities of the Africa Initiative in our episcopal areas. So that was a very motivational statement from the bishop. So we begin organizing. Now, come the Liberia issue, interesting part that happened this year in February, as the Africa Forum was in the formative stages. We heard that the Global Methodist Church was sending a delegation of 26 to attend the Liberia annual conference. And we knew they've been trying to pressure to get a conference from Africa that joins the Global Methodist. So we started organizing from the grassroots as United Methodist Africa Forum, organized with the Liberian leadership of the forum, worked, and until to the point that even the bishop in Liberia was called by the board on ordained ministry and say, we are not happy that the Global Methodist is coming. And there were already 20 people who were in the country ready for the conference. They were asked to leave. The leader of the Global Methodist, the beloved Reverend Keith Boyd, was told not to get in the plane because he was not welcome in Liberia. The Global Methodist was not welcome at a United Methodist annual conference in Africa. So we celebrated and say, this organizing is working. So now, after that, it then generated energy to say we now need to meet and organize and come together. So now we have started organizing an event in South Africa, and the forum, as I said, a space for conversations and discussions and all that. And I would like to make it, the gathering in South Africa is not basically focusing on legislation or general conference. We didn't want to start with a tone of conflict, the legislative process. It is a grassroots organization coming together. We will have a lot of general conference delegates coming to Johannesburg. We will have conversation about key general conference legislation, especially our focus will be to discuss issues on regionalization, because we see that's where the future of the United Methodist is. So April 21 to 24, there is the United Methodist Africa Forum gathering in Johannesburg, the first in-person gathering. For the past 8 or so months, we have been gathering on Zoom every month, recruiting people, joining, and now we say it's time to come together. So we'll have more than 60 people, leaders from 37 annual conferences in Africa, who are coming to Johannesburg for this gathering. Well, the way we have structured the Johannesburg gathering is first day on the 21st. It's all United Methodist Africa Forum business, much of it, looking at our, what we are calling operational document. We are trying to avoid things like constitution and all that. We just want to simplify things. So we are working on an operational document on that will state simply vision, mission, goals, and how leadership will be put in place and few things. And we work on that. We will gather in the central conferences. The 3 central conferences in Africa will gather and brainstorm on how they want to see the forum growing and what future do they see in the United Methodist, then come together and then elect the leadership for the forum. The leadership that is organizing the forum in Johannesburg is interim leadership, interested people who come together and begin to recruit more and more and more people who now want to join the forum. Actually, we are oversubscribed in Johannesburg. We have a standby list of people who want to come, who we are continuously saying, we are full. We cannot raise money to bring everybody at the moment. After this, we will see how we can move forward. So the forum will be meeting. We kind of get a shot in the arm with the support from bishops from across the connection. I can tell you, President of the Council of Bishops committed to be in Johannesburg, Bishop Bickerton, the President of the Africa Central Conference College of Bishops, is going to be in Johannesburg. The Secretary of the Congo Central Conference College of Bishops and the Chair of the Connectional Table, Bishop Mande Muyombo, is going to be in Johannesburg, and we have Bishop Kipungo from Angola, who is also going to be in Johannesburg. So we have bishops who have committed, and especially for the African bishops, their presence in Johannesburg who is demonstrating their commitment to the forum. There is a gathering in Maputo organized by GMT, and they had already signed to go to that gathering. And then we brought the Africa Forum dates. We didn't know about the GBGM gathering. And all the African bishops who are going to Johannesburg, they are working on changing their tickets, wanting to be in Johannesburg. The message we gave them is, be there at the beginning and let's work together, so that we avoid what happened with the Africa Initiative, where it was hijacked by certain people and taken away and created conflict. So we are happy. So the United Methodist Africa Forum will lead in organizing. The idea is after Johannesburg, April. We are hoping if we are successful in Johannesburg in April, then we will organize at the beginning of 2024 to then think legislation and see if we can gather General Conference delegates who are like-minded from across Africa, to gather them in Africa, gathered by Africans, and discuss an African agenda. I think there should be, next slide should be transitioning to, is it easy?
It's Jason.
Oh, Jason, yes.
So why is this important to our whole connection? So this is not only just to prevent, like Lloyd was saying, this is an opportunity for all of us here in the United States and across the connection to be in conversation with leaders in Africa, with leaders in Africa, and really help advance and amplify the voices of those African United Methodist leaders in shaping the future of the United Methodist Church. It's exciting for me, and I think for many among us, that this also represents an opportunity to have someone, leaders we can talk to in Africa, that we are in relationship with, that we know want to work for the future of the United Methodist Church, and work so that we can continue to be a united church. And this is our and that's one of the reasons why WMJM is really interested in supporting this effort, and really showing really being in solidarity with those leaders in Africa in this effort. And so when they invited the Christmas Covenant, we said yes, we would, and I think this is going to be Richard.
Yes. Well, I want to just follow up with what Jason is. I've been at 5 general conferences organizing with MFSA and the Progressive Group. And one of the things I've observed is that there are very few delegates from the U.S. who know delegates from outside the U.S. So I think the formation of UMAF is amazing, because I think finally we may begin to have conversations between delegates that are in the U.S., that there finally are people to converse with outside of the U.S. And hopefully, I think for the same way coming the other way is that Central Conference delegates will have ways to begin to converse and work with U.S. delegates, which I think would be really helpful. But moving on to the Christmas Covenant. The Christmas Covenant is a rather extensive revisioning of the United Methodist Church. And that means that there are constitutional changes. And in order to pass constitutional changes, you need to have a 2/3 vote of the General Conference, and then all of the annual conferences all around the world will have votes in each of their annual conference sessions with all of their conference delegates, and they'll take all of those votes and put them together and figure out if 2/3 of all of the annual conference delegates voted in favor of the constitutional amendments. So it's pretty clear that because the Africa Forum chose to invite the entire Christmas Covenant team, that there's a real interest in regionalization, and that while the Africa Forum has many things it's accomplishing beyond the Christmas Covenant, that regionalization, and especially seen by the Christmas Covenant, seems to be important. So there would be people going home to all 37 sub-Saharan annual conferences a year before General Conference, talking about the Christmas Covenant to the 278 delegates, General Conference delegates who are going to come from Africa, which is 1/3 of all of the General Conference delegates. So that will probably be very helpful in laying a foundation for the Christmas Covenant to be better heard and understood. And secondly, when it's time for the ratification votes in all of the annual conferences, there will be people from the Africa Forum who have been working in their own annual conferences to educate people, again, for up to a year before General Conference, about the Christmas Covenant, why it's important, and we hope to then have ratifications. The Christmas Covenant team as a team has been meeting monthly since 2019, not to discuss writing legislation, but to discuss getting the Christmas Covenant adopted, passed a General Conference and ratified in the annual conferences. And one of the things that makes it different than other attempts in the past, there is an organized group that's been working for a couple of years now, and for another year, that's really looking at ratification and education rather than, oh, look, this happened and now what do we do? So that's a big change. And I really think the Christmas Covenant has the best chances for adoption. There is one other plan that only deals with the US. I think it may actually it does have 1 or 2 constitutional amendments. But I think they may have a harder time because it's trying to deal with the US as separate and not talking about the whole connection. I think those constitutional amendments may actually be harder to ratify outside the US. So anyway, let's move on to the next slide. Why is this important to the Western jurisdiction? One of the most challenging moments being part of the Christmas Covenant team was discovering that we were not going to talk about full inclusion. We were going to talk about equity. We were going to talk about strong regionalization. We were going to talk about connection, but the Christmas Covenant, if you read it, has nothing to say about full inclusion directly. And we need to be honest about that. However, and I'm going to say this because I know there are some Constitution geeks on this phone call. The Constitution geeks will know that the General Conference has 16 or 17 enumerated powers in Article 16, in paragraph 16 of the Constitution. What sets the Christmas Covenant apart from any other piece of legislation is that the regional conferences will be given enumerated powers in the Constitution, 8 of them, that they can exercise unless explicitly prohibited to do something by the General Conference by a 2/3 vote. The current Constitution, we often hear talks about that central conferences can change the discipline, but it turns out it's very limited. It would not include ordination standards. It would not include marriage as presently written, but with the new enumerated powers, it would. So it would appear very likely that when there is a US regional conference, that we would change ordination standards towards full inclusion, that we would change marriage standards, and we could change the chargeable offenses. So it's not going to be for the whole world. This is the place where Izzy isn't supposed to talk, but Izzy, will you share your vision about what being in a connected church with different regions and different places could mean for us? Because I think this needs to be heard not from me summarizing Izzy, but from Izzy. He didn't know I was going to ask him to do this, but he's the best at it.
I'll just say it briefly that conversations and dialogue and relationship building is very important. And if we do not have relationships with each other, especially around doing mission work together, sharing a denomination together, then it's harder to move forward around many of the things that's close to our hearts. And as somebody coming from a central conference, and also, I'm a person of color, I come from a colonized country. I'm an immigrant in this country. I'm also out gay United Methodist clergy. I do have my own self-interest, right? I would imagine for many of you, it's about LGBTQ inclusion. And I can tell you that that's always in my mind. And I think of my siblings in Africa and the Philippines. And I think that if we do not have a relationship with each other across the whole connection, it would be harder for inclusion to happen in other places. But also, I want to define inclusion larger than just LGBTQ inclusion. We're talking about all the social justice issues, all the intersections, because I cannot separate my being LGBTQ from the fact that I experienced racism in this country, or in our central conferences. We feel like we're imperial outposts of the American church. So that needs to change. And I believe that the road to full inclusion involves decolonizing our church structure. That's why regionalization is very, very important. So that's why I support this, because I think of people that will not have that chance, like the privilege that many have in this country, if the conversations and the dialogue stops. And that's why regionalization keeps us at the table. There might be some differences, but then it keeps us focused on the mandate of the gospel and learn and continue learning from each other. So let me just end there and pass this on to Jason.
So we are. How can you continue to help? We're the Western Methodist Justice Movement committed to raising $30,000 to provide for the travel expenses of the Christmas Covenant team to attend the meeting in Johannesburg of the United Methodist Africa Forum. And I'm really excited to tell all of you that we are less than $1,000 in pledges away from that goal. We currently have pledges of over $29,000. And we're really hoping maybe after this that maybe we might get pledges and or donations of to get us over the top. We need, as of this evening, we need $720 to get us there. And that will allow us to provide for the travel expenses, not only of the Christmas Covenant coming from outside of Africa to Johannesburg, but also those within Africa to get to Johannesburg. And any donations we get above that are not needed for getting the Christmas Covenant there will go to helping get others to the United Methodist Africa Forum. As Lloyd said at the beginning of this, they have a wait list of people, and it's I think it's about $1,000. It takes about $1,000 to get somebody to the United Methodist Africa Forum. To support this, all donations are tax deductible. Greg just posted in our chat the link to our donation page. We're working with CalPAC MFSA. And so if you would like to do it either online, you can click on that link. Look at that, we even got a pledge already. I almost feel like one of those like the public television broadcasting fundraisers at this moment. Could you go back one? Sorry. If you send a check, you do need to make that check payable to CalPAC MFSA, right? Christmas Covenant in the memo, and you can email that to Richard Bentley. His address is on the screen now. It is also on that webpage if you click on the link. And if we have, then we can go on. And there's also a QR code on the next page if you would like to donate online. And if anyone has any questions, we're going to stop the slideshow momentarily and move into question time. All right, I'm going to try and see if I can see everybody. Does anybody have any questions for any of us? Ben has a question.
It occurs to me that not everyone might know what link means. That was referred to at some point in the presentation. What is link?
The link is the Love Your Neighbor Coalition. It is a coalition of the caucuses, of many of the caucuses, the WMJM, Reconciled Ministries Network, other progressive groups that was formed for General Conference organizing, and has also been the whole Link Coalition has been a supporter of the Christmas Covenant team.
And it might also be worth saying that Love Your Neighbor Coalition link is most of the justice groups in the US do not have the ability or whatever to do working together to build relationships outside the US. So Link has been the place where they've worked together to build relationships that would have been very hard for MFSA or Western Methodist Justice Movement, even to a certain extent reconciling ministries. They've all the IESGG, which is the help me please, my brain is mush, it's Sunday afternoon. Interethnic strategy group. All five of the caucuses in IESDG are part of Link also. So it's where we're all trying to work together to build bridges.
We have Jan.
I'm going to bring this up because it was such a good question on Wednesday night that Mona Lisa asked, and I can't ask it as well as she can. But the role of money has often been a part of colonialism. And the question was something along the line of, if we're raising money for this, aren't we contributing to the continuation of colonialism? And I don't remember who had a really good answer to that, but somebody spoke to that really well.
I believe Lloyd spoke as to why this came, because this is a request from the Africa Forum people. So I believe Lloyd responded to Mona Lisa.
Oh yeah. The so far, as much as we have experienced in the United Methodist Africa Forum, we have not had anyone imposing or attaching conditions to the donations that have been we have received. And you may need to know, as the Africa Forum, we were conscious of that also. And you can see the ways we tried to raise funds was there's a GoFundMe. This Western Methodist Justice Movement is raising funds for the Christmas Covenant group to get there, because we invited the Christmas Covenant group to meet, and this will be their first in-person meeting since the Christmas Covenant group started meeting. So they are meeting after the Johannesburg meeting. So the Justice Movement is raising for that. Then the forum's resources, we try to raise funds through GoFundMe, because we're trying to say, if someone gives to the GoFundMe, it's money coming in a big pot. We have also raised money, tried to raise through agencies. We try to ask for donations in terms of how they can support, and individuals and churches that are giving to the forum in order to bring people to Johannesburg. We are very excited that we have begin to have some individuals even in Africa who have said we are paying our way through. We have one conference that have said we want to give you a donation as an annual conference. They want to. We don't have the figure, but we have the East Angola writing a check or sending money, and we are working that they would send the money directly to the hotel where we'll be hosted to offset whatever expenses will be there for food and accommodation. So that's a good initiative, and we are grateful at this moment. We haven't had anyone who is saying, we give you money, then do this. And deliberately, the other point I would like to make is, as United Methodist Africa Forum, as we were conversing and talking and seeing how can we move forward, especially having learned what happened to Africa Initiative, when they end up being an echo or almost parroting the WCA and Good News, and they lost the whole African flavor and became the reform renewal flavor of the US. Much of they were doing has nothing to do with what United Methodists in Africa want to see in their denomination, in their church. They involved themselves in things that are not even a priority in Africa, things that are not even in the pew. Majority of people in Africa are not even concerned with what Jerry Kula spent time talking about at General Conference. It's not. So we were aware of that. And you may see what we have done is we tried to go and start building more stronger relationships with the ethnic caucuses like Black Methodist for Church Renewal, Pacific Islanders, Native American caucus, and Asian American caucuses. We said we would want to build a relationship with those groups rather than the caucuses that have locked the horns in the fight in the United Methodist. We know that caucuses like WCA, Good News, UMC Next, UMC Forward, Queer Caucus, Queer Clergy Caucus, we know these are the caucuses that have locked horns in the United States and at the General Conference. And we say, let's not get ourselves into that fight. We are not. None of those caucuses we have invited officially to the forum, but all of the ethnic minority caucuses, we have invited them all, and caucuses that are working on other issues like United Methodist Kairos Response. We are looking at caucuses that we will discuss with and say, in the United Methodist, what are issues that are affecting our prophetic and justice ministry? Broader than focus on an issue, one issue, but focus on overarching issues, just like what Izzy kind of expressed. So I think that's how we would say, I mean, if you are giving to support United Methodist Africa Forum, you have this perspective of overarching issues rather than want to support any particular one issue that may not be a priority, or that may not be a challenge in Africa, or an issue that Africa deals with differently than the Americans deal with, or the Europeans. We have a lot of cultural, ethnic, moral issues that we deal with very differently in Africa than the Western world. That is why you find us sometimes we become uncomfortable and certain issues are being talked about in public because we say, this is not who we are. And even if we see some Africans trying to talk about it in the public, we say, they must be servicing something, not our culture and what we believe in.
Lloyd, I'd love to hear when you mention the contributions of people who are actually attending, because there are people who are, this is not for delegates from Africa a total free ride to get there, because there are other related expenses. And in fact, you could share some more about what people want to, contribute on their own, like pay for their own tickets.
Okay. Yeah, there are several ways the people who are, everyone in Africa who is coming to the forum is contributing something to get to Johannesburg, because we made it very clear at the beginning that we are not paying any ground expenses in your home country to get to Johannesburg. And for those who know Africa, you may know that it may take some of our participants 2 or 3 days to get to an international airport. And they are meeting all those expenses. Getting to an international airport to fly from their home airport to Johannesburg may take them 2-3 days, sometimes including knocking at your cousin's house and say, I'm sleeping here for a night, because I would want to proceed tomorrow to go where I am going, because I'm going to Johannesburg for a United Methodist meeting. And so people are making those kind of contributions. There are some who are applying for visas. We actually, all of us, surprised. We didn't know that South Africa still requires a visa from quite a number of African countries. Our assumption when we picked South Africa was South Africa is the country that most African countries sacrificed. They were the last post of apartheid. And we thought they were going to be grateful, only to realize they still have apartheid laws in the books in terms of relating with the other African countries. So people are paying their visa expenses, visa application, and things like that. So there's that contribution that is coming from the participants. So the funds we are raising is to pay for someone's air ticket from their home international airport to Johannesburg, and then get them from the airport in Johannesburg to the hotel, pay accommodation, feed them, make sure every meal is supplied. There's no meals we can say you are on your own. That's not possible. Everyone from breakfast, lunch, supper, and in between breaks, all those meals would want to provide that. Then take them back to the airport in Johannesburg. They fly back home, and some of them be on their long journey back to their villages. So there's a lot of contribution that is happening to that.
All right. Any other questions from anyone? Oops. There's something, there's oh, Jean mentioned that last time there was a question about why, well, Lloyd answered a little bit about why it's in Johannesburg, and to give some clarification that there are United Methodists in South Africa, because there's a perception that there's just nothing but they're all British Methodists or something.
There is
Yeah, they used to be some. If you have been following from the, I think 1984, 88, there has been no United Methodist in Africa, but 88 or 84 General Conference received a group of some of the British Methodist version of the Methodist in South Africa who joined the United Methodist, and they were then became a district of the Zimbabwe Conference. Then it was Bishop Mzorewa's time, and then they grew to a provisional conference, and now they are an annual conference. So we actually have an annual conference in South Africa, which is now under the Mozambique Episcopal area under Bishop Nanala. Those who have received the invitation letters, you are receiving invitation letters signed by Reverend Mills Maliwa, who is the administrative assistant to the Bishop for South Africa Conference, to Bishop Nanala. So there is United Methodist in South Africa, and their version, they are different groups, not versions. Richard likes to talk about California Pacific, where they worship in 13 languages or 30-something languages every Sunday. You may need to know that's happening in South Africa. South Africa being the biggest economy in Africa. You have seen lots of migrants going to South Africa. Now there are Zimbabwe United Methodist Shona-speaking congregation in the South Africa Conference. French from Congo. I mean, there are Nigerians who are in South Africa now, so they are beginning also people to organize and to be part of the South Africa Conference, but worshiping in different languages, let alone South Africa itself has many. So there's United Methodist Church in South Africa, and the conference is actually growing.
All right. Thank you.
And maybe you could also share who your keynote speaker is, because
Yes. Bishop Gimande, who is the secretary of the Congo Central Conference College of Bishops, and he is also the president of the Connectional Table. He's also the chairman of the Africa University Board of Directors. He's an Africa University alumni also. So he's our keynote speaker in Johannesburg. And we appreciate his schedule was like he's going to Maputo, come to Johannesburg, fly to Kinshasa, go to Europe, then go to the US for the Council of Bishops. But he said, I will squeeze, I'll be there because I just want to be part of this. So we are very grateful that he's doing that.
Oh, Paul is asking for one of the other things that we're going to do is that if you are is that we will be doing a debrief and a debrief and a feedback of what's going on, what happened. We will be hosting one of those afterwards. If you are a donor, you will get an invitation to come and do it live and ask questions. If you're not, you'll get. We'll post the recording of it. But yes, there will definitely be feedback of what happened in Africa to everyone who is interested. WMJM will be providing that.
And I also see that there's a question about whether they could get the slides. I will send the PowerPoint slides to everybody who came today. I can get that list. So I will see, Judy, that you get that, and I'm going to assume everyone else would like that. So I'll just get that out to everyone. It'll be the slide set. You'll have to provide your own narration.
We are recording this. We are going to be posting. We're going to post the recording someplace. I don't know where yet, but
yeah. And yeah.
I have a question.
Oh, look.
I posted the PDF slide deck on Google Drive, so you can get it. It's that link right there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Someone had a question?
So let me, before we go to Teresa's question. So Judy, can you download the link, and anybody else who wants the link, and then I don't have to email anyone? I would love that. Okay, so we found a way to get the information to Judy and everyone else who wants it.
I see thumbs up. Okay, Teresa.
Okay, I'm downloading. I can't walk and chew gum at the same time. Okay. Yeah, I should have typed it. It's just a little hard to type this. I've been talking to people about all of this and why we think that if regionalization is accomplished, that could bring big changes in the US. And what I've been saying, and I guess I'd just like to know if others remember this the same way, that we have been saying for years at general conferences, it seemed that if US delegates were voting on their own, that full inclusion in the more limited sense, because Izzy importantly told us there is a bigger meaning to that, but in the sense of LGBTQ inclusion, that legislation for that could have been adopted sometime in the past. So that doesn't look like we have gone in the opposite direction. And that is why it does seem, what you said, Richard, it's very likely, I think is what you said, that we would see those changes happen if we accomplish this regionalization plan. Does that sound right?
Yes, and the reason I'm not saying for sure is nothing is for sure until it ever happens. And I would never want to predict. I mean, the General Conference cannot even get a unanimous vote on the consent calendar. If you ask the General Conference, is the sky blue, 10% of the General Conference would say that it's not. So I don't want to go that far to say that it'll pass. But my sense is that the Tampa General Conference, if it had only been US delegates, probably would have voted for full inclusion in Tampa. I know it would have happened in Portland. And after the aftermath of the 2019 General Conference was we saw the GMC WCA delegates did very poorly in most of the annual conference elections. So I think it's pretty likely that that's going to pass. if we can, when we can finally, if the Christmas covenant passes. But I don't want to be absolutely predictive. Does that sound accurate to other folks who have general conference experience? I see some nods, so I don't think I'm sticking myself out on the limb.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that the Christmas covenant does not have, this is not going to be a code word for folks in the US. It's, oh, this is about us getting what we want. This is a piece of legislation that focuses on decolonizing our church polity, so that the concerns of our regions actually come out. And one of those concerns is the concerns of the US region. But it also allows us in our central conferences, which will become regions, to focus on our own concerns. Now, it intersects with LGBTQ inclusion. But remember, for example, in the Philippines, LGBTQ people are having to deal with, just the other 2 days ago, I have a friend there who's like sort of my, little gay brother, like who I'm mentoring. And his main concern is that they don't have water in Manila. Their water services were cut, or in some places they still have issues around, for poverty. There's mining and issues with produce and poverty. And these are LGBTQ people who also do, experience that. In fact, whenever they have pride events in the Philippines, they raise up issues around human rights violations and how people are being killed, and how many of these groups in the Philippines are actually, LGBTQ advocates who are doing other issues and concerns. They're not directly around full inclusion, but it is intersected in who they are. And so we need to be mindful that we do have concerns in this country. I do get that. But my concern really is, how will the conversation continue? Because we're in one journey together. And in some places, conversations like this need to continue because the differences are really cultural. And I heard Lloyd said last time, and Bishop Mondes said in the podcast that I heard, that in some places in Africa, marriage, while it's allowed by law, it starts actually with the marriage that is in your tribe. And so same-sex marriage is not even part of that conversation, right? But the most important thing is, if we have regions that are at par with each other, we get to do the work of mission together, because those are the things that we actually do together very well. And it is in these contexts and in conferences and being side by side in the mission field that allows the Holy Spirit some space for conversations to happen. And I always say this, that we do not have the power, the superpower to change people's hearts and minds. That is the work of the Holy Spirit. Our role is to provide that space for the Holy Spirit to work her magic. And that happens when we have conversations and dialogue around things that we already believe in. And then that's when we suss out all these differences and say, wait, I think that this person is like this and that, but then, hey, we're doing work together. It keeps the conversation together. And remember, there are LGBTQ people in central conferences. And maybe their central conferences like mine would retain the traditional language in the Book of Discipline. But you know what? Right now, they're the ones saying, we're staying United Methodist. I was like really surprised. They're being attacked. Our churches are being split in the Philippines, but they're the ones that are stepping up and saying, no, we're staying United Methodist. I don't know what that is, but it's, for them, it's bigger than their own self-interest, because they see this as a communal self-interest. I think that's also cultural in some central conferences. That's why we would want to maintain that connection. It's not about, like, oh, because we want resources, we want money, or we want this. But we were nurtured by this church. That's why when we want to keep the conversation going.
That was beautiful, Izzy. I just got to say, I'm sorry, say thank you for reframing that. What I raised was one tiny little piece of the big picture of the beauty of the the Christmas covenant, but
Yeah, I mean,
I will be sure to present that to a church I'm going to be talking to in the way that you presented it. That was great.
and I know you're passionate about, the liberation of Palestinians. There are LGBTQ people in Palestine. It's a Muslim place, and they don't have space there. But I can almost feel and believe that if you talk to a Palestinian LGBTQ person, they would talk about their occupation more than about who they are.
Yeah, and when we talk about sexuality issues, even in Africa, right now the primary issues we are fighting is child marriages. It's still prevalent in some other places. We have little girls who are given up to marriage to very old people. There are places in the continent where it's a sexuality issue, and its priority is right in front of the church to say, no, this must stop. We have issues of FMG in places like Kenya, and I always explain there was a big talk about having reconciling ministries, churches in Africa and all that. I had to write a write-up to some of the African bishops explaining to them how Maheto is a reconciling congregation. It's not that they're LGBTQ there, but there are issues like FMG and the history of a child who was born with both organs, male and female organs, and culturally, the mother was blamed for that. And she was chased away with this baby because it's called taboo. How can someone be born like this? We have not seen this before. And the woman is blamed for that. And she's chased away. And what Kennedy Mwita was to take this woman and her baby into the church and take care of them. And and then begin to teach the community that this child is God's child. This is how some people are just born, they're just created like that. And we will need to figure out which organs are dominant, or we have to do a surgery now or let the child grow and make their own decision on whom do they want to be. And it starts changing the community's perspective and say, as a church, we have to stand for this child because he's a child of God too. That's a sexuality issue that is in the forefront in a community. And right now in Zimbabwe, there's commotion. They passed the marriage bill in Zimbabwe. That is confusing everybody. And the churches don't know what to do now with the marriage bill that was passed by parliament. The levels of marriage that are being described now as this is marriage, this is a union, it's too complex and confusing and destructive of the family. It's really destructive of the family. It's like we have politicians who are promiscuous, who are trying to legislate promiscuity and try to legislate it to say this can also be recognized as, and they pushed it, and now the church is stuck with that. They are now debating on what do we do with this? Now you see the marriage issue is becoming on the forefront, but in a different perspective. So it's only a way of trying to say, how do we, that's why the Africa Forum is saying, let's sit together as a forum and then say, where are you coming from? What are the real issues? Where are you coming from? What are the real issues? You may not understand it, and this one understands. So, like the marriage bill in Zimbabwe, it's a whole confusion about polygamy and not wanting to legalize it as polygamy and wanting to, I mean, it's a whole confusion that is happening in terms of how to deal with marriage. So there are issues that are happening, but probably the only difference is what issue are you emphasizing based on your culture, your background, your economic, social status, and where you are, what is a priority at that moment. I think like Izzy said that there are LGBTQ people in Africa. Yes, they are there. In Zimbabwe, we have the Gays and Lesbians Association of Zimbabwe, which is registered, which is recognized. We know the president is someone like Coldad, Everybody knows that. They used to display at book fairs and all that. People know that. But it was just saying, this is their association. Let them be. Don't just try to talk about it in public into our villages because you are doing this. So it's only how people narrate and work together to achieve. That is why we think the Christmas covenant should be, we should talk about this as an overarching legislation, which then say, when you are people who understand, who speak the same language and understand the same dynamics, then discuss issues that affect you and what do you want to prioritize as the prophetic ministry of the church in the US, in Africa, in the Philippines, and in Africa, different parts of Africa. When you are in East Africa, FMG is very prevalent. But when you come Southern Africa, no, it's not there. There are other issues. When you go to West Africa, then you may find FMG also happens in some other rites of passages that happens to girls. Southern Africa, child marriages, very prevalent.
Changing the subject slightly, thank you, Lloyd. One of the other things I want to say about connection, some of you may remember the story in probably 2018. You know, the United Methodist Church has created young adult missionaries who actually come from all over the world and are deployed all over the world. And 3 of the young adult missionaries in the Philippines, 2 were from Africa, 1 from the United States, were arrested because they were seen as too subversive because they were working around human rights issues. And it was the United Methodist Connection that said these are our missionaries that probably is why they're alive today. They were eventually all released and able to leave the country. And my impression was that it made a profound impact in Africa that the U.S. church would raise a voice for 2 missionaries from Africa in the Philippines who are, you know, and so, but I think this connection piece of working together in ministry and using our resources, I think has profound implications also for protection for people who are doing social justice activism around the world, because we can talk as a church for folks who otherwise would be seen as invisible or disposable. I think that's part of what UMKR is doing, is to try and have the world see what's happening in Palestine. Well, a connected United Methodist Church could have the world see what is happening for social justice work in Africa and provide some protection to folks who otherwise would be without protection. That's another dimension that we haven't really focused on, but I think is very real.
And a lot of our justice work depends on the missionaries our church has in Israel and Palestine. We have several. And without them, we wouldn't have eyes and ears there to report back to us.
All right. Well, I'm not. Any other questions? We have about another 6 minutes, but if not, I mean, it is Sunday evening, and I'm sure we all all have other things. But thank you all for thank you for taking the time to come and join us and hearing this really important the important developments that are happening in Africa and with the Christmas Covenant. And
There are 2 more. There are 2 more webinars or forums this coming week, and maybe Richard can post the link to register. If you have friends in the East Coast, we have times that are better for them. One is at 10 a.m. Pacific tomorrow, and the other is at 5 p.m. Pacific on Wednesday. So I think that'll be good for those in the East Coast or Central Time. So
There's
your friends in other conferences.
Yeah, there's the link. Part of the confusion is the webinars that just got posted, there's a registration link. Those are being done by United Methodist Africa Forum all by itself, not as a cooperative thing with Western Methodist Justice Movement. And that one is going to focus more, I think, on getting people in Africa to the forums in Africa. Western Methodist Justice Movement was asked to focus more on getting people from the Christmas Covenant team there, which meant then that the Africa Forum didn't have to worry about getting the Christmas Covenant team there. So they're sibling fundraisers working in ways that are cooperative, but sometimes confusing. But there are 2 more webinars, one on Monday morning and the other on Wednesday evening. And if you click on the link, you can register for one of both of those.
Yeah, and like I said, thank you. We have we've received some more pledges, so we're very close to getting to our goal. And thank you all. If you haven't, hopefully we can get ourselves right on over that. Maybe tonight. So that would be amazing. Thank you. Unless anyone else has anything else they want to add.
Jan will close us in prayer.
Oh, and then Jan will close in prayer. Sorry.
Okay, let's be in prayer together. God, we thank you for the opportunity to come together to consider not just the issues of how we structure our church, but to consider how we can better be in relationship with each other through the United Methodist Church. Thank you for the people who have generously reached out to share what they have to help this gathering take place and help us to continue to learn from people who are distant from us and different from us, and to bring your love into the world through sharing, through listening, through being examples of your love. We pray this through Christ. Amen.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
You can stop the recording now, Richard.
And our fundraising team will stay, and whoever wants to stay can stay.
Lloyd, are you staying on or am I?
We're staying on. You can stay. We're staying.
No, we have an appointment to talk 30 minutes after this ends. So are you getting off now or?